Okay, so I'm here to record the third part of the Anglo Saxon history and themes lecture, which is going to be about exile. But before we do, real quick recap, we looked at civilization versus nature, the idea that nature's out to get the Anglo Saxons. They have no defense against it. They'll struggle their entire lives and ultimately fail. Christianity versus paganism, the idea that the Anglo Saxons started out as pagans, believing in Loki, Thor, Balder, and those guys, the idea of Ragnarok. And they were converted to Christianity over the course of 500 years, and that the people who wrote all their literature were Christian. And so the pieces of literature, in large part, are written to convert pagans to pagan Anglo-Saxons to Christianity, and also to reinforce the ideas of Christianity using some of the foundational ideas of pagan Norse mythology. So now we're going to move on to our next, twice in a row. Our next one, which is exile. And exile is going to be broken into two different types, traditional exile and earthly exile. So first thing we're going to talk about is traditional exile. And I don't know where I'm going to put this thing. I guess I'll just put it up here. So most of you know what the word exile means. It's being forced to leave one's country, usually as a punishment for wrongs or for political reasons. Generally, an exile can be like a life sentence. You can never come back, or it can be for a set duration of time, like you're exiled for 5 years, and then you can return. The most commonly known example of exile was in ancient Athens. It was called ostracism. Basically, the Athenians would vote on somebody they wanted to kick out of the city for a year, like every year. And they would all tally up the votes and they'd kick the person out and they'd be ostracized. But that was more a weird Greek thing. And in Anglo-Saxon culture, exile was one of the very common punishments. A lot of the Anglo-Saxon poems that we're going to read are written by people who felt a kinship with exiles because poets wandered from town to town. They didn't have a home, just like an exile wouldn't have a home. They didn't have a home, and they wandered around telling stories, and the stories they told, featured people like themselves. And so there's sort of an overlap of exile theme with the feeling of the poet themselves. And maybe the poets themselves were exiles sometimes. You get exiled from your homeland. What are you going to do for a living? Most exiles pulled an oar in a merchant ship and provided protection, or became raiders or things like that. But some of them certainly probably became poets. Some of them went down and offered their services as mercenaries to other kings. So there were things that exiles did, but it wasn't a great life. And you can imagine what it's like to be severed from your home, never to be able to return. That's tough stuff. So let me tell you a story of an exile, and I'm making up on the spot just to sort of give you a sense of how the punishment worked. So here are two Vikings, Bjorn on the left and Eric on the right. They're old Anglo-Saxons, and they're best friends. The problem is that Northern Germanic warriors, the Anglo-Saxons, just like all the others, they had two classes of people. You essentially had your peasants, the people who worked the land and the farms, and then you had your warrior class who was there to protect them. And the warriors were trained to fight and kill, and there was a lot of fighting and killing that went on. I mean, like when we go back to civilization versus nature, it's a harsh existence. What do you do when you don't have enough resources to make it through the winter? Well, you have to go and get resources from somebody else. And that means you go take somebody's resources. You take them from them, they're going to die. But you lose guys and you'll have less mouths to feed. So ultimately it's a win-win, I guess. Anyway, Bjorn and Eric are playing cards one night, and Eric totally cheats, and Bjorn kills him. Well, this is a problem in Anglo-Saxon culture because of something called the blood feud. So Eric here is dead. But now Eric's father and brothers and uncles, in fact, all of his male relatives, have a life debt. They've got to kill Bjorn, or else their family is dishonored. And so the blood feud will go on. Now, let's say that Eric's uncles, father, brothers, male relatives managed to kill Bjorn because that's what he had coming to him because he murdered Eric. Well, then Bjorn's uncle, father, brother, cousins now have to kill all of Eric's uncle, father, brother, and cousins. And so you end up with this lifelong blood feud that will tear up the country. And so the king obviously does not want his subjects in blood feuds with each other. So he has to have some kind of a punishment that's appropriate and that fits. So here's King Hnath. He's pretty intense looking. And he's got to put Bjorn to judgment because Bjorn killed Eric. And so he has a couple of things he can do. The traditional thing to do would be to set what's called a Weir Guild. Weir Guild translates into blood price. So King Hnaf would look at Eric and be like, well, he was an up-and-coming warrior. He was worth probably 6 pounds of gold. And Bjorn and his family have to come up with 6 pounds of gold. If they come up with 6 pounds of gold and they pay Eric's family the 6 pounds of gold, the murder was legal. Everything's cool. He's paid his restitution. The blood price has been paid. So that's the end of it. No more blood feud. However, if Bjorn refuses to pay the blood price, or if his family doesn't have enough money to pay the blood price, then King Hnaf has to come up with another punishment, and that punishment was traditionally exile. So Bjorn killed Eric. To avoid the blood feud, we're going to exile Bjorn. And this is how it works. Bjorn is kicked out. Now, it could be for a certain amount of time. Maybe killing Eric warranted a 5-year exile, or maybe it was a life exile. It's hard to say. But King Hnaf is going to kick Bjorn out. Bjorn can't come back to King Hnaf's country during the time of the exile. If he does, it's legal to kill him. So anybody could kill Bjorn, and it would not result in any kind of a problem because he was exiled. He was breaking the terms of his exile. So Bjorn is exiled. There he goes, wandering off sadly into the darkness. Now, where is he going to go? What is Bjorn going to do? He's a trained killing machine who is used to having all of his needs met. He's usually fed and housed and clothed and armored and all of those kinds of things. And so what is he going to do for a living? Well, most exiles ended up on a Viking longship, pulling an oar, working for a merchant or somebody, or being a raider or something like that. And so he would get on a ship. But the real goal that Bjorn has is to work for a king. That's the job that he has. He wants his kids to grow up somewhere and to have a lord and to have a future. And so he's going to try and find another king. So let's say Bjorn gets to King Hrothgar's court. He's an older king, and Bjorn offers his service to King Hrothgar. Is King Hrothgar going to accept him? Well, the answer is probably not. There's a lot of considerations here. If King Hrothgar accepts Bjorn, he's not only accepting Bjorn, but he's accepting all of Bjorn's problems. So Bjorn, if you recall, still has a blood feud with Eric's family. If King Hrothgar accepts Bjorn as a warrior, well, then he accepts that blood feud and he agrees to defend Bjorn and his family from Eric and his family. And that is, does he want to take that on? And then there was lots of intrigue and political stuff going on back then too. Maybe King Hrothgar and King Hnaf hate each other, and they've been fighting for years. Well, how does Hrothgar know that Bjorn isn't still working for Hnaf, and this is a secret fake, and when he accepts Bjorn, Bjorn's going to kill him in his sleep? So King Hrothgar, and then, of course, Bjorn's exiled. He must have done something to be exiled. Why should Hrothgar trust this guy who got himself exiled from his old homeland? What is it that makes him trustworthy? And really, there's nothing. So an exile has a very difficult time getting out of exile. And there are stories of famous Vikings who were exiled and managed to return. One of the most famous is Eric the Red. Apparently he had a really bad temper and he killed a bunch of people in Iceland and was exiled from Iceland. And so he left and went to Greenland and lived there for a while and then came back, and his exile was over and everything was cool. That there are famous stories of Viking exiles. There are also famous stories of Viking exiles who refused to leave and then had to be hunted, and there are sagas and things like that. Anyway, that would be a traditional exile. But, King Hrothgar didn't take him, so he's still exiled, still on a boat, still sailing around, looking for work. So the other form of exile, and I don't know where I'm going to put my picture now, I guess I'll put it down in this cool little forest, is what the Anglo Saxons sort of referred to as earthly exile. And this is sort of like a symbolic or allegorical exile. The idea of earthly exile dovetails with Christianity. It's the Anglo-Saxon belief that all humans are living a life of exile from God in heaven, and that if we live our life on earth here in exile from heaven well, we can return to our quote-unquote home up there with God. And if we live it poorly, our exile is going to become permanent in hell. And so the Anglo-Saxons took this punishment of exile, and like the punishment of exile actually fits biblical Satan. Like he was with God up there in heaven, and then he rebelled and he was kicked out, and now he's punished forever, eternally in hell. He has been exiled, and so it fit really well with Anglo-Saxon culture, which predated Christianity. But it was one of the ways that they understood Christianity, that to try and put this in terms like you're a soul existing in heaven, and everything is happy up there, and then you're born like you're down here on earth, and your soul is put into a baby, and you've been exiled from heaven, and you've got to live your life here on earth, and earth is dark and miserable, and you're hungry and cold, and it's not a great place to be, but it's a test, it's a trial. Can you make it through your exile and make it through well enough to return or not? And the Anglo-Saxons, life expectancy was 26 years of age or 27 years of age or something like that. And there was a lot of death, there was a lot of loss, and the belief that these people were returning to heaven, that you were going to see them soon, that you're sharing this exile with your family members and your friends. Like, all of these are comforting beliefs to the Anglo-Saxons. And also they would use it to sort of explain, and maybe you've had this experience yourself. You ever feel like, I don't know, you lose faith in the goodness of the world or of humanity, or you feel to yourself like, things are supposed to be better than this. Things have got to be better than this. Well, the Anglo-Saxons felt that too, and they expressed it in their poetry. And the idea was, yeah, things were better than this. You feel this longing ache for a betterness because you used to be in a betterness in heaven before your soul was brought down to earth. That is sort of the belief system here of earthly exile. And so what this means is every poem in Anglo-Saxon literature that's about exile, about somebody who is been forced away from their quote unquote Lord, to travel the world and experience the difficulties of exile. It's also about every person on the planet Earth. There are two levels. There's a level where it's literally about a Viking dude who's being exiled, but there's also a level where it's about everybody living their life exiled from heaven and hoping to return or find a Lord and a family that will care for them. So this idea that home is absolutely unattainable during an exile's life fits very well. So those are sort of your themes, but one thing that hopefully you notice is how well these themes interlace, how well they all connect. So when we're looking at civilization versus nature, this idea that civilization is doomed, that human beings can never defeat nature, and that even though we're fighting for light and order and civilization, nature is ultimately going to win. And then this idea that Christianity has a way to win over nature, and that way is death, that you die and you go to heaven and you've escaped the impossible pull of nature. So your death is a victory over nature. Well, that fits with earthly exile. Your body, your existence is here on the planet, according to the Anglo-Saxons. It's tied to nature. Your body is earth, but you've got this soul that is heavenly inside of it. And when your body dies, yes, you lose your battle on earth, but you win your battle to heaven, and so it all sort of connects, it all links up. And I really think understanding that philosophical, that cultural belief system of the Anglo-Saxons will help you understand their poetry. It's dark, it's dreary poetry, but it's powerful poetry, because these Anglo-Saxons come from this pagan tradition, a tradition that really feels the value of hopeless heroism in the face of impossible odds, where defeat is not a refutation of the effort. It's about the effort, not about the outcome, where death is a victory. I mean, these kinds of things characterize the Anglo-Saxon people and Anglo-Saxon poetry, and hopefully this stuff feels fresh and interesting and new to you and you really enjoy it. Well, that's the end of the lectures. We're going to go on to The Wanderer and look at that poem, and hopefully you'll see some of what I'm talking about in there. Thanks.